The stage lights were once her world. She used to stand in front of thousands of people, her voice filling every corner of the hall. The sound of applause felt like waves washing over her, powerful and endless. She lived for that moment. The silence before the first note, the heartbeat before the song began. Her music wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. Every lyric she wrote came from a real place, every note from her heart. People said her voice could make even strangers cry. And maybe it did because she sang about life the way it truly felt. Beautiful, painful, and real. But like many beautiful things, her success didn't last forever. It began slowly, quietly, like a storm forming far away. A rumor here, a headline there. She didn't even know who started it. Someone had twisted a recording of her voice, made it sound like she had insulted someone powerful in the industry. She tried to explain, but no one listened. The story was too juicy for the media to let go. It spread like fire. Her fans began to doubt her. People she had called friends stopped answering her calls. At first, she believed it would pass. She thought truth always wins in the end. But the world didn't want truth, it wanted drama. More headlines, more gossip, more entertainment. Within weeks, her sponsors canceled contracts. Her manager told her the label wanted to take a break from her image. Even her closest friend avoided her, afraid of being dragged into the noise. The woman who once sang in sold-out arenas found herself sitting alone in a tiny apartment, watching the lights of the city she once ruled. Her phone stopped ringing. Her fans moved on to new faces, new voices. She thought of releasing a statement, of fighting back. But who would listen now? The internet had already decided who she was. One night she turned on the radio, hoping to hear something that would take her mind off everything. Instead, one of her old songs came on. The same song that had once made her famous. But now it didn't sound like hers anymore. It felt like it belonged to another person, a version of her who no longer existed. She cried quietly that night, not just because she lost her career, but because she felt she had lost herself. The following months were hard. She sold most of her things to survive. The money she had saved was running out fast. No one was offering her work, and every audition ended with awkward smiles and polite rejections. Some people recognized her face whispering behind her back. Others looked at her with pity, which somehow felt even worse. When the landlord finally gave her a notice to leave, she didn't argue. She packed a small suitcase, grabbed a few clothes, and walked out. She left the city behind, the same city that once cheered her name. The town she moved to was small and quiet. No one there knew her, and that felt like peace. She found work as a maid at a modest hotel near the bus station. The pay was small, but it was enough for food and rent. The uniform itched. The hours were long, but at least she didn't have to pretend anymore. She didn't have to smile for cameras or worry about what people thought of her. She was invisible, and that was fine. Every morning, she'd tie her hair back, slip on her gloves, and begin cleaning rooms. She learned to make beds with tight corners, scrub floors until they shined, and fold towels perfectly. Her coworkers were kind but never asked too many questions. They just knew she was quiet and hardworking. Sometimes when she passed a guest room and heard someone playing music, she would pause for a moment, listening from the hallway. It hurt and comforted her at the same time. She missed the sound of music like she missed air, but she never sang out loud anymore, at least not where anyone could hear. Her new life was simple, almost painfully so. Wake up, work, go home, sleep, repeat. But there was a certain peace in that routine. It helped her forget who she used to be. It helped her stop wishing for the stage, the lights, the crowds. At night, when she was alone in her small rented room, she sometimes opened the window and sang softly, not for the world, not for applause, but for herself. Her voice was quieter now, gentler, like a whisper of who she once was. The melody would drift into the empty street, fade into the night, and disappear like a secret. There was an old mirror hanging above her dresser. Every morning she looked at it, trying to recognize the woman staring back. The sparkle in her eyes was gone, replaced by something else. Tiredness, maybe, or calm acceptance. Yet sometimes when she smiled faintly to herself, she could still see traces of the person she used to be, the one who believed music could change the world. One evening, the hotel manager asked her to help clean the old piano room that hadn't been used in years. The piano was covered in dust, its keys yellowed and cracked. As she wiped the surface, her hand brushed against the keys and they let out a faint, broken sound. Something inside her stirred. She hesitated, then pressed another key. Then another. Soon her fingers found a melody, one she hadn't played in a long time. It was clumsy at first, the notes uneven, but her body remembered what her heart had tried to forget. For a few minutes the years melted away. She closed her eyes and hummed softly, the sound trembling in the quiet room. It felt like breathing again after being underwater for too long. Then a voice startled her. The young receptionist had walked in, holding a broom. She quickly stopped, embarrassed, but the girl just smiled. "You play beautifully," she said. The maid shook her head and laughed awkwardly, pretending it was nothing. But for the rest of the night, her heart felt strangely light. That small moment stayed with her. She didn't know why, but it gave her a little spark. A tiny reminder that music still lived inside her, even if the world had forgotten. Weeks passed, and she went back to her quiet routine. But every now and then, she'd slip into the piano room when no one was around. She would sit there in silence for a few minutes, press a few keys, and hum a tune. It was her secret, a small piece of her old life that still belonged to her. Sometimes she wondered if she'd ever sing again for others. Maybe not. Maybe her time had come and gone. But part of her still hoped that someday, somehow, her voice would find its way back into the world. Not for fame, not for crowds, but to remind her that even after everything, she was still here. That night, as rain fell softly outside her window, she hummed the same melody again, the one that used to open her concerts long ago. The same song that once made thousands of people rise to their feet. This time, no one was there to listen, yet her voice carried the same emotion as before, maybe even more. And as her voice faded into the rain, she smiled to herself for the first time in a long while. Because deep down she knew one truth: fame could disappear, money could fade, but the music inside her would never truly die. The mornings at the hotel always started the same. The soft ring of the lobby bell, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the faint chatter of guests getting ready for the day. She would stand in her uniform, holding her cleaning cart, ready to begin another shift. It was a quiet job, but it gave her something to hold on to. Routine kept her mind still. It stopped her from thinking too much about the life she left behind. She moved from room to room with calm precision. Her hands knew exactly how to smooth the bed sheets, how to fold towels neatly, how to make everything look spotless. No one would guess that those same hands once held a microphone, that those same fingers once danced across a piano before thousands of eyes. The other maids liked her. They said she was different, polite, quiet, never complaining. She smiled when they spoke to her, but rarely talked about herself. When someone asked where she came from, she simply said, "The city," and left it there. No one pressed further. In a place like that, everyone had something they didn't want to discuss. In the evenings, after the guests had gone to dinner, she liked to sit outside on a small wooden bench near the back door. It was the only time she allowed herself to breathe. The wind carried the smell of rain and distant flowers, and for a few minutes the world felt peaceful again. She often looked up at the sky, wondering if somewhere out there people still remembered her voice. Inside the hotel, there was an old room that most guests never visited. It was small, dimly lit, and filled with dust. In one corner sat a piano that hadn't been played in years. The paint on the keys was chipped, and the wood had lost its shine. But to her it was beautiful. Every time she passed by, she felt drawn to it, though she never dared to touch it when others were around. One rainy afternoon, everything changed. A little boy staying with his family wandered into that room while his parents were checking out. He began pressing random piano keys, laughing at the strange sounds. She heard him from the hallway and hurried inside, afraid the manager would scold the child for touching hotel property. But when she saw his innocent face, she couldn't bring herself to say anything harsh. Instead, she smiled gently and said, "Here, let me show you something." The boy looked up curiously. She sat beside him and brushed her fingers lightly over the keys. Her touch was unsure at first, rusty after years of silence. But then as she began to play, her body remembered what her heart had long forgotten. The melody was soft and simple, one of the first songs she had ever written back when she still believed dreams could come true. The boy listened in quiet awe. "That's pretty," he whispered. She smiled faintly. Without thinking, she began to hum along. Her voice was lower now, calmer, but it still carried that same warmth. It filled the small room like a memory coming back to life. What she didn't notice was the boy's mother standing outside the doorway. She had paused when she heard the sound and pulled out her phone, quietly recording the moment. There was something almost magical about the scene. A maid in a faded uniform, singing beside a child on a forgotten piano. When the song ended, the boy clapped happily. She laughed softly and stood up. "Don't tell anyone I was singing," she said playfully. He nodded, smiling wide, and ran back to his parents. That night she went home feeling lighter than she had in years. Something inside her had opened again, a small door she thought had been locked forever. She didn't know it yet, but that short moment in the piano room was about to change everything. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with whispers. Some of the staff were talking excitedly near the front desk. When she walked past, they looked at her strangely, not in a bad way, but with curiosity. She didn't understand what was going on until one of them showed her a phone screen. There she was, sitting at the piano, singing softly while the boy watched in amazement. The video was online. The boy's mother had uploaded it with the caption, "A hotel maid with the voice of an angel." It had thousands of views already. She froze. Her hands trembled as she watched herself on the screen. It felt unreal. That secret piece of her life, the one she had kept hidden, was now out in the open again. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At first she was terrified. She begged the woman at the front desk to delete it somehow, but it was too late. The video had already spread. People were sharing it everywhere, tagging music pages and writing comments like, "Who is she?" And, "This voice sounds familiar." Some even started connecting her to her old stage name. She wanted to hide, to disappear all over again. But something stopped her. For the first time, the comments weren't cruel. They were full of kindness, of awe. People weren't mocking her past. They were admiring her present. Later that evening, she stood outside again, looking up at the sky. She didn't know whether the world was giving her another chance or just reminding her of what she'd lost. Either way, she couldn't deny how good it felt to sing again, even if it was by accident. The hotel staff began treating her differently after that. Not in a bad way, just with quiet respect. Guests whispered and smiled when she passed by. Some even asked if she was really the lady from the video. She just shook her head and said, "It's not me." But deep down, she knew her secret was out. A few days later, the manager called her into the office. She feared the worst. Maybe they thought the attention was bad for the hotel. But instead, the manager smiled gently and said, "You've made us proud. People are calling, asking if you'll perform here sometime." She didn't know what to say. The thought of performing again terrified her. She had spent so long trying to bury that part of herself, and now it was knocking on her door again. That night, she went back into the piano room. The same dusty piano waited for her. She sat down and stared at the keys. The world had found her again, even when she wasn't looking for it. For a long time, she just sat there in silence. Then, slowly, she pressed a single note. It echoed softly through the room. She began to play, not for anyone else, not for the internet or for fame, but for herself. Each note carried a memory, a feeling she had pushed aside for years. She remembered the first time she ever performed, the joy on her parents' faces, the thrill of hearing her own song on the radio. All of it came rushing back. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't stop playing. The music flowed through her like it always used to. By the time she finished, the moonlight had slipped through the window, bathing her in a soft glow. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She still didn't know what would happen next, whether the video would fade away or change everything again. But this time, she wasn't afraid. Something inside her had woken up. The world might see her as a maid, but she knew she was still the woman who once touched hearts with her songs. And as she sat there alone in the quiet room, her fingers resting on the piano keys, she whispered to herself, "Maybe it's not over yet." The video spread faster than she could have ever imagined. Within days, it was everywhere, shared by music pages, reposted by fans, and even mentioned in small online articles. People couldn't believe that a hotel maid could sing with such emotion. Some said her voice sounded familiar. Others said it felt like listening to someone who had lived 1,000 lives. At first, she didn't want to look at any of it. Every time someone tried to show her comments or views, she turned away. She had learned long ago that public attention came with both love and cruelty, and she wasn't sure she was ready to face that world again. But slowly, curiosity got the better of her. One night after work, sitting alone in her small room, she opened her old phone and searched for the video. There she was, and sitting at the piano, wearing her faded uniform, her hair tied back, singing softly with that same quiet sadness she thought she had buried forever. The video wasn't perfect. The lighting was dim and her voice cracked once or twice, but that imperfection made it real. People could feel the truth in her voice. The comments were endless. Some wrote that they had never heard a song so honest. Others said her voice brought them to tears. A few recognized her. "Isn't this the singer who disappeared years ago?" One wrote. "She looks different, but that voice line, it has to be her." She stared at those words for a long time. It was like looking at a ghost, her own ghost. The world she had run from had somehow found her again. The next few days were strange. Guests who stayed at the hotel whispered when she walked by. Some left little notes of encouragement at the front desk. Others simply smiled at her as if they knew her secret but wanted to keep it safe. Her co-workers, once casual and distant, began treating her differently too. They admired her quietly, sometimes sneaking into the piano room after hours just to hear her sing again. One evening, after most guests had gone to bed, the young receptionist asked softly, "Would you play that song again? The one from the video?" She hesitated but agreed. This time, a few of them gathered around the piano, her small audience. When she started to sing, everything else faded away. For those few minutes, she wasn't a maid or a forgotten singer. She was just a woman sharing her heart through music. When the last note faded, the small crowd clapped softly. Their faces filled with genuine admiration. She smiled shyly and said, "Thank you," her voice trembling. Later that night, as she walked home, she thought about how strange life could be. Years ago, she had lost everything because of her voice. Now that same voice was giving her something back, not fame, but connection. One morning, she arrived at work to find a small crowd waiting near the lobby. A group of journalists had shown up, cameras in hand, asking for the singing maid. Her chest tightened. She wasn't ready for this. The manager quickly stepped in, telling them the hotel didn't allow interviews without permission. But she could see the excitement in their eyes. They wanted a story, the fallen star who became a maid and sang her way back to light. After they left, she hid in the laundry room, her hands shaking. It all felt too familiar. The attention, the pressure. She had lived this before, and it had nearly broken her. She didn't want her quiet life turned into headlines again. That night, she didn't go near the piano. She sat in her room, staring out the window. The sky was cloudy, and the air was heavy with rain. She thought about deleting the video, disappearing again before things got out of control. But then she remembered the comments. The strangers who had written that her song helped them feel less alone, that her voice gave them hope. Maybe running away wasn't the answer this time. A week later, she received a letter. It was from a man who had been a music producer years ago, one of the few people who had always treated her kindly. He had seen the video and recognized her immediately. The letter was simple and respectful. He said he was sorry for how things had ended back then, that the industry had been unfair to her. He didn't ask her to come back or record anything. He just said, "Your voice still has something the world needs." She read the letter over and over. It was strange how a few words could stir so many feelings. She thought about the person she used to be, young, full of fire, dreaming of fame. That person was gone, but maybe something even stronger had taken her place. The next evening, she went back to the piano room. The dust had been cleaned, the lights were brighter now. Someone had even placed a small vase of flowers on top. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play again. This time, she didn't hold back. Her fingers moved with purpose, her voice carried warmth and power. The melody flowed naturally, as if it had been waiting inside her all this time. Unknown to her, one of the guests recorded the performance again, not to exploit her, but because they felt something special. That video also began to spread. But this time, she didn't panic. She accepted it quietly. The world had found her, yes, but it wasn't the cruel world she once knew. This time, people weren't tearing her down. They were lifting her up. One evening, while she was cleaning the hallway, a small group of guests approached her. One of them said softly, "Your song helped my daughter through a hard time. Thank you." She didn't know what to say. She just smiled, her eyes glistening with tears she tried to hide. That moment made her realize something important. Maybe her purpose was never about fame or applause. Maybe it was about touching people in simple ways, through honesty, through emotion, through truth. She started singing more often, but only when her heart felt ready. Sometimes she sang in the empty lobby late at night. Sometimes she sang quietly while cleaning. And each time, someone new would stop and listen, moved by her voice. The hotel soon became known as the place with the singing maid. Tourists began visiting, hoping to catch a glimpse or hear her song. At first, it made her uncomfortable, but as time passed, she found peace in it. She didn't perform for attention. She sang because it made her feel alive again. People began sending letters, messages of gratitude, stories of how her voice had touched their lives. She read each one with a full heart. The pain of her past didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled her. It became part of her story, and a story she could now tell with pride instead of shame. She still lived simply. She still wore her uniform, cleaned rooms, and walked home under the same quiet sky. But inside, she was no longer the woman who ran from her past. She was someone reborn through music, through kindness, through the strange way life gives back what it once took away. As she sat by her window one night, watching the rain fall, she whispered to herself, "Maybe this is what I was meant to do, not to be famous again, but to remind people that even broken voices can still sing." Her phone buzzed with another notification, another video share, another comment, another sign that her melody was finding its way into the world once more. And this time she didn't turn away. She simply smiled and whispered, "Let it be heard." Her life began to shift in quiet ways. The hotel no longer felt like just a place of work. It had become the place where her second story began. The guests still came and went, but many left her small notes thanking her for her songs. Some even slipped little gifts into her cleaning cart, a flower, a piece of chocolate, a handwritten message that simply said, "Your voice touched my heart." At first, she didn't know how to react. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers anymore. It had been years since people had admired her without expecting something in return. But this time it felt different. It was pure and gentle, and she accepted it with quiet gratitude. Still, there were moments when the attention scared her. Every time a new video of her appeared online, she worried the past might come chasing her again. The same cruel headlines, the same false stories. She couldn't forget what it felt like to be torn apart by people who never even knew her. One afternoon, as she was polishing the hotel counter, the manager walked up to her holding a phone. "Someone wants to speak to you," he said with a small smile. She hesitated before taking it. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar, and kind. It was the producer who had written her the letter weeks earlier. "I saw the new video," he said softly. "You sound even more alive now. I'd really like to meet you. Not for business, and just to talk." She didn't answer right away. The idea of facing someone from her past made her nervous. But there was something honest in his tone, something that told her this wasn't about contracts or money. It was about closure. So she agreed to meet him. They met in a small cafe by the edge of town. He looked older now, with gray hair and softer eyes, but when he saw her, his face lit up. "You haven't changed much," he said kindly. She smiled faintly. "I've changed enough," she replied. They talked for hours. About music, about how the world had changed, and about the mistakes that had once cost her everything. He admitted that back then he hadn't done enough to protect her. The industry had been cruel and he had been too afraid to stand up against it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve what happened." Hearing those words after so many years made her eyes sting. She didn't cry, but her chest felt heavy with both pain and relief. "It's all right," she whispered. "Maybe it had to happen. Maybe I had to lose everything to find myself again." Before they parted, he said, "If you ever want to record again, I can help. No contracts, no pressure. Just music. The way it should be." She didn't promise anything, but as she walked home that evening, something in her heart stirred. The idea of recording again scared her, but it also filled her with a quiet longing. She had spent so long hiding from her voice. Maybe it was time to let it breathe again. A few days later, she received a simple invitation. It wasn't from a record label. It was from a local community center. They were hosting a charity event and had seen her video. They asked if she would sing just one song. Nothing big, no cameras, just a small crowd. She almost said no. The thought of standing in front of people again made her palms sweat. But then she remembered the boy from the hotel. the one who had unknowingly brought her back to music. She remembered the look on his face when he heard her sing, and she thought, maybe this is how it begins again, not with fame, but with small steps. The night of the event, the hall was simple but warm. Families filled the chairs, children ran around laughing, and a small stage stood at the front. When her turn came, she felt her heart racing. She stepped up, her hands trembling slightly, and looked at the crowd. They weren't critics or reporters. They were ordinary people sitting with open hearts. The music began, just a single piano playing softly. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to sing. Her voice started small, uncertain at first, but then it grew stronger with each word. The melody was slow and full of emotion. A song about starting over, about falling and rising again. The audience grew silent. Every note carried a story. Every pause carried a truth. When the final chord faded, the room erupted into applause. She stood there for a moment, stunned. She hadn't expected that kind of reaction. Some people even had tears in their eyes. A little girl ran up to her afterward and handed her a small drawing. A woman singing under a bright sun. "That's you," the girl said proudly. That night as she walked home, her heart felt full. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a broken singer or a forgotten name. She felt whole again. Over the following weeks, small invitations kept coming. Community centers, schools, and local events wanted her to sing. She accepted a few, turning down others when she felt overwhelmed. She didn't want to lose herself to pressure again. This time she set her own pace. People online started calling her the Maid with the golden voice. It was strange but sweet. She smiled every time she saw that phrase. She knew she wasn't a maid anymore, not really, though she still worked at the hotel. But that title reminded her of how far she had come. One evening, as she was leaving the hotel, she saw a small group waiting outside. They held posters of her old concerts, memories from a life she thought was gone forever. One of them, an older man, said, "We never stopped listening. We always believed you'd sing again." She was speechless. All she could say was, "Thank you." The producer called again a few weeks later. "I think the world is ready for you," he said. "But only if you are," she laughed softly. "I don't know if I'm ready for the world," she said, "but I'm ready to sing." And so one quiet afternoon, she stepped into a small recording studio, not the grand one she used to work in, but a cozy room filled with warmth and memories. The same producer sat across the glass, giving her a reassuring nod. She put on the headphones, stood before the microphone, and closed her eyes. For a moment, everything was silent. Then she began to sing. Not the old songs, not the polished hits that once made her famous, but something new. A song about forgiveness, about healing, about rediscovering the light within after years of darkness. Her voice cracked once or twice, but she didn't stop. Every note carried truth. By the time she finished, tears streamed down her face. The producer didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said softly, "That was beautiful. That's the song people need to hear." She smiled through her tears. "It's the song I needed to sing," she whispered. When she left the studio that day, the world outside looked brighter. The sky was painted in soft shades of gold and pink. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was walking away from her past. She felt like she was walking toward something new, and deep inside she knew her story wasn't over yet. Her melody, the one she thought had been lost forever, was still alive, waiting to touch more hearts, one quiet note at a time. Months passed, and her new song slowly began to find its way into the world. The producer uploaded it online with her permission, without any grand announcements or press releases. It was simply titled "Home Again." The song started quietly, almost unnoticed, but people who heard it couldn't forget it. They said it felt raw and real, like a voice that had lived through storms and still found a way to sound gentle. Comments poured in. Some recognized her voice and wrote messages like, "Is this really her?" or "I thought she disappeared." Others didn't know her past but were moved by the honesty in her words. One person wrote, "It sounds like she's singing straight from her heart, not from a stage." She read those comments late at night after finishing her shift at the hotel. She didn't reply, but each message warmed her in ways she hadn't expected. She had once dreamed of millions of fans and flashing lights. Now all she wanted was for her music to reach even one person who needed it. And it was happening. The hotel staff had changed too. Where once they saw her as just a quiet worker, now they looked at her with pride. The manager even played her song in the lobby one morning. Guests stopped to listen, asking who the singer was, and the staff smiled knowingly. She felt shy but happy. It was strange. After all the years of trying to prove herself, now she didn't need to. Her work spoke for itself. One afternoon, while cleaning a guest's room, she found a note on the bedside table. It said, "I know who you are. Your song helped me through a hard time. Thank you." She stood there for a moment, reading the words again and again. She didn't know who had written it, but she smiled and kept the note in her pocket. It reminded her that no act of expression, no matter how small, ever goes unseen. Then one day a letter arrived at the hotel. It was from a music foundation inviting her to perform at a charity concert for young artists. They wanted her to sing Home Again and share her story, not as a comeback, but as an inspiration. At first she hesitated. The idea of standing in front of a large crowd again made her chest tighten. But this time she wasn't the same woman who used to chase perfection. She was someone who had faced loss, silence, and shame, and learned to stand again. So she accepted. The concert was held in a beautiful old theater, one she used to perform in long ago. Walking into that space again brought back so many memories. The bright lights, the echo of footsteps, the faint smell of wood and curtains and tongue, it all came rushing back. But instead of fear, she felt calm. Backstage, she sat quietly, holding a small pendant she always wore. It was the only thing she had kept from her old life. The producer came to see her before the show and said, "You don't have to prove anything tonight. Just sing." She nodded. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage. The audience was packed, students, families, and a few familiar faces from her past. The lights dimmed and a single spotlight followed her to the center. The room was silent. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to sing. The opening notes of Home Again filled the theater, and her voice carried softly but surely. Every lyric painted a picture of someone who had been lost and found herself again. The crowd leaned in, completely still, as if afraid to interrupt the moment. By the time the song ended, she heard sniffles from the audience. Then came the applause, long, heartfelt, and thunderous. She bowed her head, tears welling up in her eyes. This applause didn't sound like the ones she used to chase. It wasn't for fame. It was for truth. After the concert, people lined up to meet her. Many told her how her story gave them hope. Young artists, single mothers, even elderly people who thought it was too late to start over. One girl hugged her tightly and said, "You showed me that broken things can still shine." Those words stayed with her long after the crowd had gone home. As she left the theater that night, she looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, scattered across the dark. She smiled, thinking of all the nights she had spent cleaning empty rooms, singing softly to herself. She had no idea then that those quiet songs would lead her here. In the weeks that followed, her life began to balance in beautiful ways. She still worked at the hotel, but she also performed small shows now and then. She taught children from her neighborhood how to sing, helping them find their voices without fear. The joy on their faces when they hit a note right was better than any trophy she had ever won. Her story began appearing in magazines and blogs, but this time, the headlines were different. They spoke of resilience, hope, and new beginnings. The world that had once turned its back on her now saw her in a new light, not as a fallen star, but as someone who had learned to shine quietly. One evening, as she was locking up her classroom after a lesson, she noticed the same young boy from the hotel standing at the door, the one who had first asked her to sing. He was taller now, with a shy smile. "I heard your song," he said. "It's beautiful," she smiled warmly. "You helped me find it," she replied. He looked surprised. "Me?" "Yes," she said softly. "You reminded me that music isn't about fame. It's about sharing a piece of your heart." The boy nodded, his eyes wide with understanding. "Then I want to learn too," he said. She laughed gently and told him, "Then let's start now." And so, in that small classroom, as the sun set through the windows, her voice filled the air once more, joined by another young and full of promise. It was the sound of life continuing, of dreams finding new forms. Years later, people would still talk about her, not as the singer who once lost everything, but as the woman who rebuilt her world through kindness, patience, and song. Her journey became a quiet legend, told in whispers by those who believed that hope never truly fades. Sometimes she would walk past the hotel where it all began, pausing by the lobby window. The staff still played her song there. Guests would stop and ask who the singer was, and someone would always smile and say, "She used to work here." She never corrected them. She just listened, to her own voice echoing softly through the halls that had once held her sorrow. And she would smile, knowing that she had finally found peace. Her story wasn't one of revenge or redemption. It was about rediscovering the small, honest joys that make life worth living. It was about learning that even when the world forgets you, your voice still matters, as long as you have the courage to sing again.